Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 143. So glad you could join me. Sorry for the delayed start. I went to log into Zoom to meet with Chris Anderson, today's poet, and I had changed my upgraded our Google account to a nonprofit account, and apparently that makes your Zoom login change, and I couldn't get to the old stuff, so I had to make a whole new Zoom, and then had to get connected with Chris again. All my fault. I should have thought of that before, but I didn't. So here we are. So glad you could join me. It's going to be a wonderful show today. Today's guest is Chris Anderson, like I mentioned. He'll be here in about 10 minutes. And just one of my favorite poets. I'm really excited for this episode. But first, we're going to take a look at today's poem. There's two Poets Respond poems I want to share to kick off the show. Neither of the two poets that we're publishing could be here today for different reasons. Today's poet, Jean Procot, is traveling and so couldn't make it to a computer or phone right now. And then the second poet for Tuesday's poem is in Ukraine and so can't make it right now. But this is Neon Shades of Youth. And of course, the topic for the week that everybody was talking about in most of the poems that were submitted was the upcoming overturning of Roe v. Wade that was leaked out of the Supreme Court on Tuesday, I think it was. And the poem of the day today is one of those ones that I don't know. I love this poem because it felt like it was sort of listening in on conversations in a poetic way. You got to sort of feel the discussion going on and everybody's feelings about it through this poem. This is Jean Procot, and I'll read her note really quickly. This is what Jean had to say. I wasn't sure how to write about the leaked opinion to overturn Roe v. Wade. There's too much to say, so I put it off. But when I heard my students talk about their fears and their futures so openly and passionately, I realized I needed to blend their words with my own. So a lot of these comments from the poem, it's a sort of a stitching together or braiding of comments that she heard in her class discussions about this. And here's Jean Procot reading Neon Shades of Youth.
Neon Shades of Youth, with lines from my high school students' conversations after the Roe v. Wade SCOTUS leak. It's not ovulation, it's ovulation. I am a young woman in America. This is my neon youth. There is a man in a black coat at the back of the dark alley, and I fear I am only waiting my turn. You cannot build a human from my organs after I die. A man's body, seminal vesicles like a tiny brain behind his bladder. No one has ever taken his straight cis white rights. A woman's heartbeat, as red as a wax seal, hides a letter they won't let us read. Where does the egg go? Are we shells, or are we roots, or are we buildings, or are we torches?
And once again, that was Jean Procot with Neon Shades of Youth. And just the way that sort of stitches in different things into poetic lines was a really beautiful way to put everything that's going on right now, I think. The other poem for this week, which is going to be Tuesday's featured poem, this is a translation of a Ukrainian poet, Walls Trembling Like Horses by Dmitry Blizniuk. And the translator is Sergei Gerasimov. And Dmitry writes here, I am in Kharkov, which has been bombed and shelled by Russian troops for 75 days in a row. Here I try to survive and write poetry. That's what Dmitry says. And then this is his poem, which is going to be Tuesday's featured poem. Walls trembling like horses. And I'll read it for you. Walls trembling like horses. The sounds grow. They are the teeth of a vehemently rotating circular saw. And the bomber folds the sky like a book, cuts the sky in two. And you, seized with terror, shrivel up into I, into we, like into a lifeboat sent by God. But you are too big to squeeze in. Quickly and rudely, you cover your mom with your body. Your stunned guardian angel blindly thumps its wings against the linoleum like an albatross on the deck. Where are you? Are you still here? Still alive? My dear people, the sky bursts with explosions. The sky gets filled with pink manganese solution. The oblong eyes of the beast of the horizon. It's the trepanation of the despairing city with pneumatic picks. The walls of your house tremble like horses that caught the smell of a wolf. And once again, it's Walls Trembling Like Horses, a poem from Ukraine by Dmitry Blizniak. So hope you enjoy that one. Very powerful poem. That's going to be Tuesday's featured poem on rattle.com. Now we're going to go to a quick break, get everything set up, and we'll be here in just a moment with Chris Anderson, today's guest. So hang tight. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I mentioned, today's guest is Chris Anderson, a wonderful poet. Chris Anderson was the featured interviewee in our Poets of Faith issue in Rattle number 45. He's a recently retired professor of English at Oregon State University, a poet, a retreat leader, and a Catholic deacon. He's the author or co-author or editor of over a dozen books, including books of literary criticism, textbooks, a book of essays, a memoir, and 2 books of poetry. His most recent book, Light When It Comes, is a mixture of homilies and poems. His weekly homilies often include poetry and are available by email subscription on his website, which is deaconchrisanderson.com, which I just love. I encourage everybody to sign up. It's really cool to get poetry and wisdom like that through the mail every Sunday. It's a really nice thing to sign up for. So go to deaconchrisanderson.com to sign up for that. But here he is, Chris Anderson. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Pretty good. Nice to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. It's been a while. I can't remember when we had a reading that we did with you years and years ago. I can't remember exactly how many, but it was a while. So it's been some time. And also, I have to say, you haven't sent any submissions in for a while. So I started to wonder. I have this worry that a lot of my favorite poets kind of get bored with the poetry world and stop writing poetry. And I was starting to worry that that maybe you'd focus more on the homilies and things that you do through your website that way, and weren't writing. But you tell me that you took a bit of a break after retiring and are getting right back at it now, huh?
Yeah, I took a sabbatical from sending things out. It was just too frustrating. I was getting too wrapped up in it. So I spent a couple of years just writing for myself and going through. I have a big archive of poems, and I was going through them. And it was a real experience of freedom. And by the end of it, I was ready to start getting out there again. So I'm sending out again.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see that you are. Do you want to start out with a poem? What did you want to read first? Was it From the Next Thing Always Belongs?
Yeah, I wanted to read a poem from a book that's already unbelievably 11 years old. And this is a poem that you published in Rattle under a different title. And that's about the only thing I changed about this poem. As you know, from recent experience with me, I can be an obsessive reviser. But this is a poem that came out more or less in this form, except for the title. Move over, darling. I have to admit that sometimes I don't care about the historical Jesus, one way or the other. I've always thought there were other forces at work too. The sun and the wind, the sadness that comes in the late afternoon. Did you know that our bones are only 10 years old? No matter how old we are, it's always the same. Something to do with the cells, I guess, with regeneration. There are miracles like this all over the place, in everybody's bloodstream. And that's all right with me. Doris Day was once marooned on an island with another man. Years went by, and her husband, James Garner, was about to marry another woman, Polly Bergen. But then Doris came back and sang a lullaby to her kids and tucked them into bed, and they didn't even know who she was. I think life is just like that. Sometimes we are the rock, and the spirit is the river. Sometimes we are the mountain, and the spirit is the rain.
And that was Move Over Darling, from this wonderful book, which is actually one of the last books I blurbed. I stopped doing it only because people kept asking and I couldn't keep up. And when I started having to turn people down, I just couldn't do it anymore. But I love this book. And that poem was published as Living the Chemical Life in
Right.
Rattle. And I'm always curious. I never asked you, what was it that made you want to change that? And why did you change it to the title it has now?
Well, that's the title of the movie that Doris Day that I talk about, the reference to Doris Day. And I don't know, it just somehow seemed like the right title.
Yeah, it was a strange title. I mean, I remember. Why was the title "Living the Chemical Life" originally? That's the thing. It was one of those poems that, like, the title made me always, ponder and say, like, why was it called that? It's an interesting title.
Well, I just like the phrase. I just thought it was interesting, and so in a way, I was trying to talk about how God is present in our everyday life and in the things that happen to us, sort of physically in the world. But then I thought, well, living the chemical life sort of implies drug use or something. I guess that's the other reason that I decided that I would. But my original idea was, well, first, I just like the sound of it. There are a lot of things about this poem I didn't fully understand. They just came out there. Like, why did Doris Day appear in this? So I was sort of in that jumbling things up mode. And then I thought, no, that's because I want to sort of talk about how embodied things are.
Yeah. And that poem is just a great example of what I love about your work. Was it's free to take leaps and move through places and free, like you said, you didn't know what you were doing with the poem, and you were just mixing things and combining things, and but there's this sense of deeper meaning all the time buried beneath it. Can you talk about that, about what your style of poetry, what you're drawn to, and why you take those leaps, which is what just makes your poem so alive to me, is the leaps of imagination, and you never know where you're going. Doris Day will appear out of nowhere, for example.
Well, I appreciate that. This is an example of that kind of poem, a leapy, jumpy, even jokey poem, although I hope in a serious way. And I guess I write this kind of poem partly because that's just how our minds work, or how the images work. There is that kind of free association that goes on, I think, whenever we write. And sometimes we revise it out. But when I think back to what I think the effect of it is, I think meaning is always between the lines, even in a poem that's not jumpy. And that sort of things don't quite make sense in the spiritual life or in any kind of life, and yet they sort of do, that things are connected. And that when we sort of let them all be there, there's this sense of something implicit that cannot be fully articulated. And part of this too, I know a lot of poets are doing this lately, is I've noticed when I've been going through my archive this last couple of years, I write a lot. I write sort of daily, and I put things in files. I pull some things out or keep them and start revising or working on them, or some of them just kind of click into place. But a lot of them I put aside. And as I've been going through the archive, I've realized and my new poems too, how often I talk about movies or television shows, or I've got a long poem about WKRP in Cincinnati that I'm not sure anybody would understand unless they knew that TV show, song lyrics, and so on. And so part of it is there's a way to write Christian poetry or poetry of faith that is sort of reducing the spiritual to the ordinary. And I don't want to do that exactly. I want to kind of go the other way. I want to sort of resist that dualism and say, yeah, Doris Day is one of the ways that the spirit works, I think. So that's kind of the effect of it. But when I'm writing it, or when I think about it afterwards, that leap just was there. Why was Doris Day? It was sort of opaque to me why she showed up, except I just read a biography of Doris Day. She fascinates me. But then I thought, well, it's a Mother's Day poem, by the way. And by the way, after that Ukrainian poem from Ukraine, oh my God, what a powerful poem. And it's hard not for me to think my poems are a little thin, or I think, or a little, isn't that the problem for all of us right now in the face of everything that's going on? Not that you need to write a political poem or, write about it exactly, because I think any poem is a way of resisting brutality and violence and oppression, even if it's about Doris Day. But still, there's a sense that Doris Day was the mother that the children didn't know. Mm-hmm. And the way that I think the Spirit is working, again, I'm not thinking this when I'm writing, but the Spirit works in ways that, sort of indirectly.
So, you're unusual in that you're a Catholic deacon and a poet. You're the only one I know. So can you explain how that came to be, and what is a Catholic deacon? Because it's not a hierarchy. I know. I think as far as my conception of it, it's like it's one below a priest. So there's some rites you do that a priest doesn't, and it's kind of. So how did that come to be? How did you become a deacon, and how does that relate to poetry? More to the point.
Well, that's a good question. A deacon has certain faculties that a priest has. We can hatch, match, and dispatch, baptize, marry, and bury. We also preach. We serve we have certain prayers that are part of the Mass, but we do not consecrate the bread and wine. So that's one of the main things that the priest does. And we can't do what's called the anointing of the sick, the last rites. But we have a lot of the same sacramental functions. Deacons can be married men. It's an ancient order. You can read it in the New Testament or in the early church documents. How I was called to be a deacon is just over the years, I was, attracted to the contemplative life and to prayer life and so on, and it started to write about those things. And at one point, we were going to a monastery in Oregon called Mount Angel. And I just started to fall in love with the idea of being a deacon. It just was kind of a sense of falling in love. And I was a little guilty about it, to tell you the truth. But gradually, there was just this sense that there was something missing in my life and that there was something that I was being pulled to do. And the way poetry relates to it is that when I started becoming a deacon, when I was in the process of becoming a deacon, I had to go back to seminary. I had to go to seminary and study. And during a fundamental theology class, I just started writing poems. They just flowed out of me.
Oh, wow.
I had written poems for quite a while, although that's my first love. And there was something about the freedom I felt as a deacon that led me to write poems. So how is being a poet and being a deacon related for me? I don't think I can be a poet without being a deacon. Otherwise, the poetry just disappears. It's, or it's all just about the poetry business, but being a deacon gives me a sense of poetry as prayer. Poetry is meaningful, even if nobody ever reads it. And it's the other way around. There are lots of different ways to enter into a religious community and lots of different ways to experience God. And for me and for lots of others, I think for all poets of faith, it's this sense that we can enter into that sacred space through image, through the poetic, through what can't be explained. And so so I think of liturgy as poetry. Mm-hmm. I think all of this as sort of encountering the mystery, and in a way that poetry and music and art do.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense, because to me, poetry is prayer. That's how it's always felt to me. As a I'm not a church going person. I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but poetry is a form of prayer that it's a ritual that you do every day, and you're speaking to the universe, to God, and trying to make sense of your life and your place within it. And that's what poets are doing. And a lot of poets do write every day, like you would pray every day. And it's a kind of practice that enriches life and provides, so many of the things that religions do. So I think that's a great example. You mentioned that you felt guilty for being a deacon. Why is that?
Well, it's partly because one of my sisters-in-law said, "You want to be a deacon? We need more men, ordained men. Deacons are ordained, mm-hmm. and we wear fancy outfits and so on. And part of what you have to deal with when you're in the Catholic Church is patriarchy. It's not the only place where you have to deal with patriarchy, but it's one of the places." Mm-hmm. And just also the sense that I wasn't worthy to be a deacon, which is a common feeling. I mean, if you think you are worthy to be a deacon or priest, you probably shouldn't be. And partly because I'm not a joiner, oddly enough. I tend to want to stay out of groups and institutions and organizations. So that's not guilt so much as, wait, why am I doing this? What is this? It didn't quite make sense, but it was the guilt. I don't know. It's just, in some ways, I think if you're trying to discern the will of God or the movement of the Spirit for you, you have to sort of discern, well, what's pulling you, but also what's holding you back. And I started to identify that guilt as maybe something not to listen to.
Yeah, that's interesting because, again, I can relate to that just through poetry because I was a science major, and I love poetry and English and reading, but I felt too like why should I write and why should I think what I'm doing matters, and how is poetry more valuable than finding an mRNA vaccine or something, and it was a struggle to come to terms with that and finally let it go. So I kind of feel similar there. Let's hear another poem. I think let's hear one from You'll Never Know, I think is the next.
Yeah, this is a book that was published in 2018, You Never Know. And this is an example of the other kind of poem that I tend to write, a narrative poem, where I try to tell a story. Of course, lots of my poems are sort of in between. But sometimes things happen and I just want to honor them. They're these powerful experiences and I just want to honor them. And a lot of those experiences come out of my ministry as a deacon. These amazing things happen. And this is a poem that I thought of, I guess, in the context of Ukraine and all the children who are suffering, not just in Ukraine, but, Sudan, Afghanistan, all over the world, even in our own communities. And one of the, I don't know, it's a gift in a way. It's a terrible gift, but I get to experience this as a deacon. And so I don't know if it's entirely clear from this poem, but, and I don't remember how this happened, but there was a woman with a 4-month-old baby, and she was either on the way back from the hospital when the baby died in her arms, or she was on the way back, or she was going to the hospital. And for some reason, she appeared at the funeral home. And she walked in with sisters and others. And she was holding that baby, and she wouldn't let the baby go. She wouldn't let it go. And I got called to come down there. And this is what I walked into. This is a more explicit poem. One of the complicated things for me, in a way, and another way not, is how usually my poems are pretty restrained when it comes to faith. In some ways, I wish they could be a little less restrained, but this one is less restrained. This is, in a way, one of the most explicit poems about faith. So it's called How Warm They Were. The mother was holding the baby in her arms, and she was rocking back and forth, and she was wailing. The sound of it came in waves, rising and falling. And I came into that room, and I said the words. And they were beautiful words, and they rose and fell too. They had a rhythm and a force. And I think after a while, they started to calm and center the people in the room as I said them into the dark air. But mostly what I felt was helpless, was powerless. And I was helpless. I was powerless. It was the words that mattered. And what was deeper than the words, I could feel it. I wasn't thinking about myself at all. For a moment, I was caught up with the mother and the father and all the aunts who were wailing and the grandmothers and the grandfathers and all the people in the world in that terrible, beautiful darkness. Let the children come to me, Jesus said. The kingdom of God belongs to such as these. And he was there. In the darkness. Jesus was there. I can't explain it. At the end, as I made the sign of the cross on the baby's forehead, as I touched her cold, lifeless skin, I could feel the tears of the mother falling on the back of my hand. How warm they were, almost scalding.
Yeah, that was How Warm They Were. A powerful poem from Chris's second book, You Never Know, which is right here. And that's something I wanted to talk about, Chris. The responsibilities of being a deacon. I mean, it's such a valuable service, and it's one of those things that sort of exposes what we don't at all, like, just can't get right about capitalism in our society now. As our society becomes more secular, there's no way to like monetize those really important functions that, teaching people and being with people through those hard times. Like, you can go to a funeral home and have the funeral director who's been experienced death talk to you while trying to sell you the most expensive coffin, and it's just such a valuable thing, and the church provides that, but we have no other way of getting it. I mean, we can get it sometimes through poetry or sometimes through, friends and things, but there's no organized way of people who have been through that. So how, I mean, what is your experience like? Like, how often do you do these kind of things, and how deep is that need? Because it seems just huge to me. Like, even just our cat died a few weeks ago, and then we had the euthanasia was done in home with somebody who just does that, and who knows, who's used to being with people as they lose their pets, and just that the comfort that they could provide is such a valuable thing. But it's not something that our society does very well anymore.
Well, I have blessed dogs and cats too, as they were dying or after they've died, their blessings. One of the things that's good about being Catholic is that there are all these prayers. I mean, when I walked in this situation, I wasn't saying my own words. I was saying the words of the rite, which are poems. I mean, the prayers are poems, and there's a rhythm to it. And even people who are not religious, I often get called into situations where the people are not practicing Catholic, or they just need something and a priest is not available, because there's a real shortage of priests. So deacons kind of fill in the gaps. And so I come and I'll read these prayers, these poems, and people don't know that that's what they're longing for, but they are. That's what they want. It changes the air in the room in some way. So that's, sort of the rhythm of the words, or the rhythm of the Psalms. How often do I do this? I have 4 funerals that I'm doing next week.
Wow.
This last week, I did a house blessing, a baptism, 2 hospital visits, served at Mass last night, the Vigil Mass. I also do spiritual direction. I have a number of people I meet with once a month. So I have 2 or 3 people a week that I talk to for about an hour, or listen to for about an hour. So it fluctuates. I don't make any money, speaking of commodifying. Deacons do not get paid, which is an issue in a way in the church too, is who can afford to do this? Well, retired people or academics. I've been a deacon. I taught for 38 years, 34 of them at Oregon State. I've been a deacon for 24 years. I retired 2 years ago. So there's about 20 years or more where I was doing both. And that was hard to balance, actually. There were these 2 lives, but then it was more kind of, it would go in bursts. I'd have a lot of deaconing stuff. Like every 6 weeks, I'll preach at all the masses. I'll preach at 5 masses or 3 masses. But since I retired, and now that COVID is kind of lifted, it seems as if I'm doing, there's always, 1 or 2 things a day that I'm being asked to do. And and where else do they get it? I think people are longing for what traditional religion can offer. Traditional religion is not the only thing, as you said. Literature can offer. There's so much junk, there's so much cheapening, there's so much sort of avoiding of death, ignoring of death. But they are longing for something. Mm-hmm. And I love going into those situations, and I love how, like in this experience, it's not about me. It's not about me coming in and saying, profound literary things. It's language that means something. Means something in the moment. What effect does prayer have in general? If I'm praying for Ukraine right now, what difference does that make to Ukraine? I mean, that's the big choice. It's like, what difference does a poem make? Mm-hmm. Teilhard de Chardin, a 20th century French Jesuit and mystic and scientist, he said that the spiritual success of the universe depends on the release of every possible energy in it. And that somehow or other, the effect of a poem or the words of a rite or of a prayer, they have some kind of invisible effect on the world, all evidence to the contrary. I sort of wandered in that answer, but yeah, I do this a lot and I love doing it, and I love doing it for free. That also means if I'm not paid, I'm not on staff, and I don't have to go to staff meetings. And having taught for 38 years, I've been in enough meetings to last me a long time, forever.
So what is it, just to follow up on that a little bit, because you touched on this, but what is it about language itself? Like in this poem, you mentioned that it's the words that matter.
Yeah.
And what is it about language that draws us that we value so much in those situations and others? Like why language and not something else? I mean, what is it about special words that are special?
That's really interesting. And of course, it could be music too. That's something we haven't talked about. In this situation, there wasn't music because although there was the sound. I have never heard keening before like that. So part of it was just the rhythm of the words, not their content. That's part of it. But part of it, one of the things about, this is just within the Christian tradition now, is that it's something the King James Bible captured back in the 17th century. We have new translations now, better ones. Although some people have said it's the bland leading the bland. These translations are a little watered down, but it's this sense of simplicity. The Lord is my shepherd, or there was once a sower, very simple language, but it becomes majestic because it's in this rhythmic pattern, a lot of it with and God said made the light, and the light was good, and. And I think there's something about hearing, like in the Rosary. In the Rosary, there's very much the quality of a mantra. Hail Mary, full of grace. You do it if you pray a Rosary 50 times. There's a way in which the word has a mantra-like effect. And then I think if we think about content, if we get to the point of content, like at a mass where you might actually hear the words that are being read aloud. This seems too easy, but I think it's really true. The language of the Gospels and the language of Scripture is fundamentally poetic. And I think there's, in that simplicity of language, people can hear something and feel something they can't quite put into words. Another little footnote on this. The word parable, in the Greek for parable is parabolo, to throw together or to juxtapose, which I think is really interesting. And that's a form in the Old Testament, a genre, and that's also, Jesus was a parable teller, storyteller. But there's a wonderful definition of parable by a New Testament scholar named C.H. Dodd. He says a parable uses ordinary language, but it leaves us in sufficient doubt about what the language means that it teases us into thought. And that's what I think, if we're away from these ritual situations, and it's not just language then, it's ritual, it's gestures, it's touching, it's embodied, it's living the chemical life, I guess. But when we're in this content situation, I think it's that they leave us, you think that language is all about faith, and it is in a way, but it's about what can't be put into words. It leaves us in sufficient doubt about what they mean that we think or we feel.
Yeah, I love that expression, leaving sufficient doubt to tease out understanding. Is that, I mean, that's just what poetry does. I mean, that's just a great way to put that. I think I was looking through the poems to see if we'd have more that touch on your work as a deacon. I don't think we do. So let me ask this question now, even though I want to get to more poems.
Sure.
Somebody was asking about just the confidentiality, because a lot of your poems do. Like we have that wonderful poem. I love that blessing the bathroom poem that you do yours. So what is how do you deal with that, of telling people stories, which is such an important part of what you write? Really is, but there's a confidentiality aspect where I don't know, how do you navigate that problem?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to read a poem, the one I've revised 29 times. One of the reasons I've revised that so much is the confidentiality issue. Sometimes I change the names or the gender or the location. I do that when I preach too. Part of what I like to do is tell what I've heard and seen among people, and in my experiences with them. And then sometimes I make it personal. I will, particularly if it's about something that people are not proud of. I don't tell stories. So-and-so did a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the good things they did or the struggles. If it's something involving, I don't know, temptation, I will put it in my own terms. Yeah. Or I will take an image that I don't think is too, I will take a story that I don't think is embarrassing, and I will just go ahead and use it without worrying about confidentiality, but I probably should. And sometimes I ask for permission. Mm-hmm. And the problem with the poem that I revised so much is, maybe I'll read that next, is that I didn't ask permission. Mm-hmm. And Barb, my wife, wants me to change the names. And I should. If I ever publish it, I should. But I just love those names. Mm-hmm. And one of the people is dead that I wrote about. They're probably never going to read a book of poetry. So in other words, I don't handle it very well in some way. Uh-huh. And I do ask permission when I can, but a lot of times I don't. I wrote a poem that's in The Next Thing Always Belongs. Somebody told me a story about their mother. And the brother of the person who told me the story wrote me an email and said, "Is that about my mother?" And I'd not asked permission from the brother either. And he was glad. Mm-hmm. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. Yeah, and yet I want to honor them. And the language they give me this wonderful language. I mean, they say things that are really powerful, or do things that are really powerful.
Yeah, it's something that we do too with Poets Respond. That comes up a lot. Someone will write a poem about a child who died, and it's a newspaper article story that has been in the news, and I won't even think about the parents of the family having finding the poem. Like, what are the odds but they always do. And and every time that's happened, they've been like grateful, and I've gotten really great messages about the poems we've published about things like that. But it's strange how somehow the universe always finds, the people always find it somehow.
Yeah. In fact, can I read that poem now?
Yeah, let's do that.
It's called Double Wide. This is, I told you I retired, and then for a couple of years I just worked through my archive and wrote new poems and pulled things out. And this is another narrative poem that's drawn from my experience as a deacon. It's a relatively new poem, and I think one of the reasons I've revised it so much is to try to honor them. And I'm worried that it will seem condescending to the people involved, or that there's an approach to writing about faith that I've fallen into too, where you say, I'm a Christian, but I'm a smart Christian. I'm not like those poor people in the pews. I didn't vote for Trump. I'm a Christian, but, I'm mystical. I'm, watch me be sensitive, and watch me be sort of, I don't know, more profound than the ordinary person. And my experience has been just the opposite, not just the opposite, but my experience has been to come into contact with all kinds of people whose faith is in some ways simple, but simple in a profound sense. Anyway, this is called Double Wide. Dorothy and Jean's double wide was weathered and worn, and when I walked in, it felt like home. Jean was glad to see me, smiling through his ruined teeth. The coffee pot sputtered on the cluttered countertop. The night before, he'd left a message on my phone that he was so lonesome for Dorothy, he thought he might blow his friggin' brains out. But the thing about short-term memory loss is that every day starts anew. I'll never forget the day I married them, that sweet old widow and that lonely, battered man. Dorothy wore a simple print dress, Jean a straw cowboy hat with a feather in the band. We were standing by the tabernacle in the front of church, and taking Dorothy's hand and looking into her eyes, he said haltingly, "Ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough." So even though it seems from the poem that Dorothy is the one who died, actually she survived. She was in a terrible car accident. Jean is the one who died a couple of years later. So I worry that if Dorothy read this, she would think that I was making fun of Jean and making fun of them. And I kept writing an ending after this. I kept adding an ending because I wanted to make it clear. In fact, in one of the endings, which I had realized was too obvious, I said, "I'm not making fun of Jean." I loved him. But yeah, and I still think if I leave this, I still think there's a missing beat here. And yet on the other hand, well, without the extra stanza there, I'm not sure how these two things fit together, but maybe they do. The point is that he actually did this during the wedding ceremony. And I wasn't ready for it. He just started to say this. And he had fallen off a ladder 10 years before, and he stuttered, and he had some kind of mental problems. So and I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And yet then I realized it wasn't. It was profound. Or there's this cheap shot maybe, but the thing about short-term memory loss is that every day starts anew. You know, he left a message on my phone that he was going to kill himself. I didn't get it till the next morning. That's part of the struggle writing this poem too, is how much do I explain? And so I hurry over there, and he's just happy as can be.
Yeah.
And so the issue of confidentiality is very much on my mind here. And it's also the issue of, I've revised this so much. This event happened maybe 5-6 years ago. Am I telling the truth? I mean, even were his teeth really ruined? They were stained, but somehow the sound is good. At one point I put crooked, but they weren't really crooked. I've just been trying to remember what his teeth really looked like. And then, did he really wear a straw cowboy hat with a feather in the band? Yeah, I think so, but I've written it so many times. So it's tricky. What I want, this relates to how much you explain too in a poem. These two experiences with Jean were religious experiences for me. God was present. I believe what happened there was sacred, and I named that with the language of my tradition. But whenever I tried to name it directly, the poem just, but if I don't, I'm this was a profound experience, and I want to honor it.
Yeah, well, I read, because you kept sending me revisions, so I read several, and honestly, reading that, maybe it was part of hearing you read, but I thought the end, I almost teared up. Like, it was hard, at the end to hold back that emotion, and I'm not even sure where it comes from either. I thought it was a great poem, and so I think it works. I think ending this way is a really good way to end it, and yeah.
Thank you.
So let's see. Let's hear another poem. I think we're kind of talking a lot and not getting through enough poems.
Okay.
And,
Well, let me back up. I wanted to talk about something real quickly, and it's related to this. I wanted to touch on a prose book of mine because it's really kind of a poetry book in disguise. It's the book Light When It Comes. It's a book I did for Erdman's, and Erdman's is a Christian trade press, so it was partly an experience of trying to actually sell books, and which I think it's possible to do and still write well. I haven't figured out how to do it, but I had a really good editor, and it's these collage essays, and the collages are 10 of them, and the collages are made up of pieces of my homilies, but also pieces of my poems with the line breaks taken out. And that's, I couldn't do that with all of my poems, but I have a fairly plain style. I write in a fairly conversational way. And I do it when I write my homilies. I love the literary form of the homily. I love writing homilies, but I write to speak. I write for the oral delivery, and with some of my poems, it just fits naturally. I wonder, what does it mean about my poems that I can take several of them and just, lots of them, and just turn them into, there are a whole bunch of the rattle poems that are in there, like just kind of disguised. Anyway, here, this is from the preface. And I just want to show you these 3 short paragraphs, because each of these paragraphs is a poem that I just took the line breaks out of. So the shock of stars at 5 a.m., the bright belt of Orion and the arc and sweep of those other brilliant, nameless lights, and even the blackness glittering, the smell of wood smoke and fir, the cold, damp air. I hear the voice of my wife calling from another room. Do you know where I put my book? Standing at the sink, rinsing out a bowl, I look up and see a strand of a spider web rising and falling, made visible by the wind. Then another and another, looping from the willow to the roof, glinting on and off, as if all the shingles and boards of the house are secretly bound with thread. So I just wanted to touch on this quickly. I learned a lot writing this book. And after I wrote it, all I wanted to do was write poems. But it's interesting here to me that the shock of stars at 5 a.m., that's the first stanza of a poem. I hear the voice of my wife, that's the last line of another poem. And then the third paragraph is a short poem, I think with only a few words changed. Mm-hmm. And then what's interesting is that for me, again, in terms of what to say and what not to say, in the difference between poetry and preaching, or poetry and the essay, is that you can see, are people seeing this at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you see I go on and I start to talk about it. I comment on it. I explain. And that's what you don't do in a poem, or at least you don't do very much. I'm interested in poets who can do that, sort of come out and say things. Like Wendell Berry is one of my heroes. He can do that in a way, although sometimes he seems preachy, but I like what he's saying. But the interesting thing about this book is that my editor kept encouraging me not to preach very often. Mm-hmm. And what I'm preaching in those is I'm saying, look, God speaks to us through these moments. God speaks to us poetically. Mm-hmm. And so the short poetic moments, in ways we can't, in fact, the idea of parable, teases us into thought. Well, these are just all these little parables. So I'm sort of saying, hey, look, we can't understand this. And God just comes to us in these small, ordinary, and yet somehow mysterious ways. So I it's sort of the book is kind of performing its argument. So that's just a quick look, and I put a lot of poems in there, hidden, that I hadn't been able to, that had been published in journals, but hadn't been in any book. Mm-hmm. And I'm sort of wondering about that. Those poems kind of got lost. I'd rather write poems, is what it comes down to.
I wanted to ask about this, about your experience with combining poetry for general audiences, because they're part of your homilies, that newsletter that you do every Sunday, is full of poems, and how do readers react to that, or your audience? How do your audience react to that?
Yeah, I'm very interested in that, because people have been a lot more responsive to the poems than I thought. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't put "Move Over, Darling" in my newsletter. I wouldn't share that. I do retreats, and I use a lot of poems in retreats, not my own, but I'll use Wendell Berry, Ted Kooser, Jane Kenyon. There's a wonderful Welsh poet, R.S. Thomas, not Dylan Thomas, R.S. Thomas. I probably wouldn't use Jack Gilbert. I probably probably my very favorite poet. I wouldn't use Tony Hoagland, another one of my very favorite poets. But what I've, Mary Oliver, I know there's controversy about Mary Oliver. I love Mary Oliver. And she's very widely read. And I think people I've said this before, are hungry for poetry. And I've been surprised at people who respond to poetry. I just did a retreat recently, about a month ago, and used a lot of poetry, and people really respond. You just have to use somewhat more accessible poems. Mm-hmm. But they don't have to have religious, explicitly religious content either. So I've been surprised and encouraged I have some poems in a file that I call homiletic poems that are much more explicitly preachy. And I've been posting those. I don't know if you've noticed, one was called Gratitude. And so I've been kind of experimenting with that. Can I write, who's my audience?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Dorothy or is it Tim? Or is there a difference between you?
Yeah, that's the thing that I just wonder about and want to get at too. Is it just seemed like there shouldn't be a difference. Like, I mean, you can talk to anybody, and they have amazing things to say. They have really great insights, but somehow there's sort of the sense of being afraid of poetry, which is all over the place.
Right.
That there's something about how heightening things to being special is sort of frightening in a way
Yeah.
that I think people resist. And so I'm wondering if maybe the context that you're delivering it, because you're coming from a religious place, you're already in that space, so you have more
Yeah.
permission,
Yeah.
or do we just not give people enough benefit of the doubt, and maybe we should present things that are complicated and let them
Both.
be, So I
Yeah,
never know
both.
how to balance that and how it all fits together.
I don't either. One of the things I've been doing for a number of years, it came out of my teaching as a writing teacher. I never taught poetry. But in my retreats, I have people free write about 10 minutes each session. And in the last session, I have them go through and underline about 5 lines from their free writing and pull them out and make them into poems.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing sometimes what comes out. And even if the poems are terrible from a poetic standpoint, the people really they're surprised. I did this with a group of deacons. Now it's confidentiality from Reno, the Diocese of Reno. Man, what a difficult group. I had one guy just get up and walk out, but because I was doing this touchy-feely stuff. But by the end, I stuck with it, and it was amazing what those guys produced. These cowboy boot wearing Reno, ex-police chief. So yeah, I think just like we sort of underestimate the spirituality of these ordinary people. Even people with cowboy hats, have poetry in their souls. You just have to sneak up on them with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think we all do. I think we all have poetry in our souls. I think we evolved to do this, and we all have a spiritual component, whether however it's manifesting itself, and we all have, we live in a world of language too, and so it's all comes together. I think for everybody, and just how to make, I mean, it just comes back to the thing of like how to, it's clear what people are missing,
Yeah.
but how do you get it to work is always a difficult thing.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure we get through a good number of poems. So let's do like 2 more poems before we talk anymore.
Okay. So one of the things I've done in this break is I read a terrific book, a fabulous book by Terrence Hayes, American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassins.
Mm-hmm.
What an astonishing book. And one of the things I loved about it is this idea of the American sonnet, which I didn't really know about. He's not the first to write them. It's kind of informal sonnets. And I just fell in love with that form. They're not rhymed to iambic pentameter, which I don't think I'm capable of doing. They're just really, a friend of mine calls them 14-liners. But I just fell in love with that form because I tend to write in the neighborhood of 14 lines. I write long poems, but my shorter poems tend to be 14 lines. And I want to share with this poem, When Barb Brings Shy to Sunrise. Because I like this kind of broadly Shakespearean shape, which seems a little pretentious in a way. It's like sort of a broken Shakespearean sonnet or a free verse Shakespearean sonnet. Just because I like those for some reason, I don't always do this, but I mean, I literally wrote hundreds of these things because I just love the form. There's something about it, about the break you have to make in the second or third stanza. Anyway, and this is also an example of how language, my wife is named Barb, and she has a little dog named Shy, and she reads at elementary schools with Shy. And one of the elementary schools is called Sunrise. And so I said, well, when Barb brings Shy to sunrise, I just said that. It's the language of ordinary speech. And then down below, I'm going to quote somebody, and I have permission to quote her. And that is how you spell her name. And she said something, and I thought, oh my God. So anyway, this is When Barb Brings Shy to Sunrise. When Barb brings Shy to sunrise to read with the kids, it's like she's bringing communion. They open their books, and Shy lies on his side, and they reach out to touch his warm black fur. It's not about words. Shy has a body, part terrier, part chihuahua, with bright brown eyes and little orange feet. He weighs 9 pounds, 6 ounces. This is what people don't understand about who God really is. Last Sunday at Mass, when Diane brought the large ciborium full of hosts from the tabernacle to the altar, as she stood there holding the body of Christ, her arms began to shake. It felt so heavy, like the dead weight, she told me, of a sleeping child. With these sonnets, very often I write knowing how I want to end. I mean, when she said this to me, I've been thinking about Shy and Sunrise, and when she said this to me, it went, I knew those two things went together, and I was going to try to write towards the ending. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to reduce the Eucharist to a dog. I mean, I'm sincere about this. Mm-hmm. And of course, the connection, which I didn't fully see until I started writing it down, is that Shy is about the size of a sleeping child, and then dead weight of a sleeping child. The ciborium is like a large bowl or container, and the tabernacle is where we store in the ciborium all the leftover sacrament at the end of a Mass. And then during the next Mass, we bring it forward. So that's another issue for me as a Catholic poet, is I'm not writing to persuade people that that's the body of Christ. I'm writing, if you're a cowboy poet or a nurse, I love the way you publish poems from librarians and, whoever you are, you're going to write out of your own experience. Well, this is my experience. Plus, I love the word ciborium, mm-hmm. and I love the word tabernacle, and that actually happened. So that's one of those sonnets. And here's another one, the beautiful river. And it's got that same shape. And this one is a little bit more leapy or an associative. The beautiful river. What does love look like? Tom says he remembers how cool he thought I looked in my 56 Chevy. They only wanted $300 for it. But Dad checked it out, and it always ran great. There are different kinds of freedom. There are different kinds of love. There are different ways of saying what we think is true. I could take you right now to the exact spot on the riverbank where they found that car, nose first. The morning after, someone stole it, and the river would still be flowing. The beautiful river. So a couple of quick things about this. As a poet of faith, you don't always have to be writing about explicitly poetic things, even though the beautiful river showed up. That's from a gospel, the beautiful river. I mean, a gospel song, a hymn. And I like this one because it did end up someplace I didn't expect with the river. I knew I wanted to write about the Chevy and that it was stolen. Tom is my brother-in-law. He's quite a bit younger, so he knew me when I was a teenager. And the word love, I don't know why the word love is there exactly. In a way, it doesn't scan, but when I change it to the word fact or truth, the whole poem just contracts. It just loses its life. And in a way, I'm saying, Tom, you don't know what you're talking about, because that was a $300 Chevy. And it was my dad who told me I should, it was okay. I don't know anything about cars. And then somebody stole it. So in a way, it's like deflating. But it's right by the river. And it's a beautiful river. So that's, what does love look like? I don't know. Maybe it looks like the river. So there's a little lift at the end, maybe, because of the song. And again, it's another song. Yeah.
Well, if anybody has any questions, I should say, for Chris, leave them in the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll pass them along if I can. There's something I wanted to talk about, and it's sort of a half-formed sort of thought that I was thinking about just considering your work, which is very much trying to understand things. And I keep thinking, even though you're not Jewish, you're Christian, but that Israel, I always think of that, how it means struggle with God is the definition of that, and how poets struggle with like life and try to come to meaning in the same way, and there's a sort of a struggle in all of your poems too, of trying to make sense of what you're experiencing and its connection to everything else. The next thing always belongs is a great title that sort of exemplifies that. But how does that function? How does and sort of faith too, and what faith means, and the doubts that happen as well, and
Yeah.
how to find what's real.
Yeah.
How does that all tie together for you?
Well, I think a lot of people are not literate about faith or literate about scripture. Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, but apparently hadn't read the Psalms. There's like 2/3 of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the Gospels, at the end they kill him. It's part of it's deep in the tradition. It's deep in the scriptures that this is a matter of struggle and doubt and of entering darkness. There's a caricature of faith out there. And sometimes it's within different traditions. It's inside of it, but it's also in the way it's represented. So I think a mature faith, or St. Augustine said, of course we don't know what we're talking about. If we knew what we were talking about, we wouldn't be talking about God. Or there's a contemporary theologian, David Tracy, Catholic theologian, who says, all valid theology proclaims its intrinsic inadequacy. And so, it's hard when we're surrounded by caricatures of faith, or when as Christians or Jews, we don't sort of practice our faith. That it's not about, somebody else wrote, what the angels announced above the stable in Bethlehem was not a topic for conversation. So, that you're encountering a life, you're living a life. So how I reconcile it is, first of all, by immersing myself in the tradition and reading all these other people. There's a notion in the spiritual life of consolation, which is a sign of the presence of God, but there's also a notion of desolation, that desolation, or the dark night of the soul, or dryness or emptiness, that's part of the spiritual tradition. And that's something you have to experience. So it's not a matter of kind of walking around with a fatuous grin in your face all the time. So that's one of the ways I handle it, is by just drawing on the tradition. But the other way I handle it is inside of my poems. I'm always struggling with the same thing everybody is. God, I wish I could believe more. I wish I could really believe that God was speaking to me, through a Doris Day movie. I say that. What you write, obviously the voice in a poem, it's a character. It's me, but it's a version of me that is much more detached and zen than I really am. I say, well, wait a minute, this is really God. And then I'm in this room here where I pray, and I'm just thinking, oh God, where are you? And I'm totally deceived, and what's going on here? Or how do I say this? Or, am I getting this right? Or what's happening? So it's my own experience of this, and the tradition and the scriptures and all of this sort of, as you say, it's Jacob's name is changed to Israel, which he wrestles with God. And I think that's the true nature of it. So when I'm wrestling, when I'm doubting, another quote, Pope Francis says, anybody who is certain is not, how does he put it? Uncertainty is a necessary part of faith. Anybody who is really certain does not have Christ in him. Mm-hmm. So then the challenge too is how to deal with people whose faith is much simpler. Like Gene was a QAnon, the guy, he was a QAnon guy, mm-hmm. And yet you don't read them literally. The people who are fundamentalist or literalist, you can't read them literally. There's fear there. There's doubt there. There's longing there, and to try to get to that. And then occasionally you run across a person who's been given the gift of faith, deep and profound in simple faith, and you experience it, and you think, man, that's the real thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just thinking about we were doing Trust Falls with my son, and he turned around and said, "Isn't it easy? It's much easier this way if I can see here there." And there's a way though that if you can see what's there and don't have doubt, it's not faith, because you know what's going to happen, and that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. So we have two more poems. Do you mind? Do you have to run anywhere, or do you have a little bit more time?
I don't. Yeah, I know.
Okay. So I want to get to both these poems. Let's do one poem, and then I'll take a couple questions from the audience, and then the last poem.
Okay. Okay. So this is a poem that doesn't have any particular religious context at all. You know, when you're a poet of faith, you write about what comes to you, just like if you're a poet of doubt or a poet of anything, you're just okay. So this is called Tilt-a-Whirl. This was a sonnet, but not everything could be 3 quatrains in a couplet, I discovered. There are 15 lines in this poem, which for like 3 weeks just bugged the hell out of me. But I could, whenever I made the last 3 lines into 2, it just didn't work anyway. Maybe now that I'm retired, I've got too much time in my hands. Tilt-a-whirl. I'm down on all fours on a paved path just beyond the Benton County Fairgrounds. Who knew how dizzy a dad can get? I have a picture of Maggie when she was a little girl, riding in a kiddie car. She is slowly going around and around. She is smiling the smile I was always afraid concealed her disappointment. But we are older now, and we've just been on the tilt-a-whirl, and everything is spinning. Please, no, I tell the deputy sheriff, I'm okay. As if that long, smooth path were the only way I'd ever make it home.
That was Tilt-a-Whirl, another new poem from Chris.
Just real quickly, my daughter is 37, 38 now, but in the poem, she's 10 or 12. And then in the poem, I'm thinking back to when she's 5 or 6. And there's a way this can be a comic poem, right? I wrote in the Tilt-a-Whirl, and I'm trying not to throw up. And I'm on all fours, and I hear a voice, and it's the deputy sheriff who thinks I'm drunk, and or at least wants to know if I need any help. And I didn't want the sheriff to move me. I don't want to move at all. And then let me see. This is the last poem. Did you say just one poem?
Yeah,
and
let me ask, pass on some questions here. So Dick Westheimer asks if you're familiar with Robert Alter's exploration of the art of biblical poetry.
Oh my God, yes I am.
And so do you find your poetry responding to that poetics? And that's something I know nothing about, so maybe you can explain what.
Yeah, Robert Alter, one of the things I did for years at Oregon State was teach a course called The Bible as Literature. Every big state university, like 150 students. I loved that. And he sort of was the leader of, or the father of, the latest generation of biblical scholarship in the field of the Bible as literature. And he has a translation of the book of Genesis that he's translated the Psalms, he's translated the whole Pentateuch and the stories of David too. But I use this translation of the book of Genesis, and he's just wonderful. And he talks about that style is the argument. And this goes back before Alter too. He's very interested in patterns, and he has the advantage of actually knowing the ancient languages. He's a Hebrew scholar. And the poetry of the languages, of the poetry of the words in Hebrew, and so on, and patterns and all of that. But he also talks about how the minimalism, the spareness of Hebrew poetry and of Hebrew narrative is part of the point, that God cannot be named. That in the Jewish tradition, you don't name God directly. You don't say the name of God. There's a displacement for it, and you say Adonai or something else. And so there's a way in which the poetics and the narrative structures are sort of embodying the idea. And one final, I could talk about Alter forever. I got to meet him once. He's a really nice guy. He's just one of my heroes. But one of the things, for example, he says in Hebrew narrative is that everything that's happening in a novel, in a chapter or 3 chapters, is happening in one line. So when Jacob says, first sell me your birthright, sometimes the first thing a character says is indicative of the whole character. And the first thing that Esau says is, give me some of their red stuff. And so he's, sort of an Arnold Schwarzenegger character before he was governor. And Jacob is more, I don't know, somebody else, smart and scheming and so on. So that you begin to see that the scriptures are not just flat, but there's a whole lot going on. So I know about Robert Alter, and about half my class was stolen from him.
Yeah. When I took a literature of the Bible, we talked, I think it was, I was in college at the beginning of the internet. And so we talked about how the Bible was like the first hypertext with links between between
well,
one section and the other was how how my professor there, Kenneth Gross at the University of Rochester, put it. And
it's fantastic.
yeah, I love that class too. And that's kind of something I wanted to just somehow the Bible has so much literature in it.
Yes,
It's somehow like we learn literature from that in a way.
yes.
Um, and I wonder, do more? We talked about this with Janice Harrington a couple episodes ago because she got her love of poetry through going to church and hearing the scripture read in that poetic, rhythmic way.
Yes. Yeah.
And so she talked about that, and I'm just wondering, as people become, less church attending, over the years, if that's maybe one of the reasons why we're having less poetry in our lives, because aren't learning that ear for literature through that regular presence at a Sunday service.
Yeah.
Do you,
Yeah.
do you
I think that,
find yeah? So my question is, do you find the parishioners are sort of more open to poetry because they have that experience with literature through the Bible?
yes and no. I mean, there was a Pew, yes, but also no. There was a Pew survey done from the Pew Foundation asking college teachers if we thought the Bible, English teachers, if we thought the Bible should be taught in high school so that students would better understand literary references. And I said it's the other way around, that we should teach literature so that people can understand the Bible. And so I think part of what happens, there's a natural, even within Catholicism, a tradition that doesn't encourage literal reading. There's a tendency to be looking for the message, to boil it down to one meaning. And I think it's because a lot of people, good, faithful people, have not read any literature. And so they approach the biblical text as if it is giving us a message instead of giving us an experience. They don't understand that. I mean, for example, there's the idea of genre, right? Different kinds of language. There's a wonderful book by a Catholic scholar called "And God Said What?" And it's about the idea of genre, and that not everything in the Bible was intended to be read as history. A lot of it was intended to be read as short story or fable or comic story or parable or other things. And I think a lot of people just don't know that. They immediately assume that the only genre that is valid is because of science. I mean, we live in this culture, this age that is so conditioned by science that when people approach the scripture, they don't have those experiences of how language can work in different ways. Language can do something else than hit you over the head. Language can do something else besides telling you you're going to hell. And oh, by the way, that there are contexts for that. It's complicated, and that's part of the love of it. But there's this understandable longing for answers, and I just don't think that's how Scripture works. But I do think it works the other way. That people get steeped in Scripture, it does influence them, even kind of working against this other tendency. So I think it's both. But I really, really think that one of the, I mean, if you think you can swipe everything, you can't swipe God, and you can't summon him whenever you want to, and you can't figure it out in 2 or 3 seconds. And I think there's a desire for people to do that. And I think there are a lot of Christian writers and Jewish writers and other writers who will give that to you if you want. And on the internet, there's some very, very fine writers out there from different religious traditions, but there are plenty who will hand this to you on a platter or hand this to you in a little meme and say, here's what it's about.
That's really interesting, because that's not how I would think of it at all. I mean, the stories are so rich with meaning and question. I think, finding questions there is what we're meant to do, clearly, instead of finding answers.
There's a scholar named Richard Rohr who says Jesus is asked 183 questions in the Bible. How many does he answer? 3. But people are looking for answers. And the question when Jesus walks on water is, did he really walk on water? Did he really calm the storm? Did he really multiply the fishes and loaves? And it's not that the miraculous is not a really important issue, but it's just exasperating. I mean, there are reasons these stories are being told. What storms are you experiencing in your life? What needs to be calmed? Who's asleep and who isn't, and so on. It's part of the Jewish tradition, this tremendous emphasis on multiple readings and on reading between the lines and so on, of the rabbinic tradition. And it's also part of the Catholic tradition up until the late 19th, early 20th century, when along with fundamentalism, the church reacted against what they called modernism. But you can see why that is too. There's a way to approach this multiplicity which say this is meaningless. Mm-hmm. The biblical studies is sometimes a way of telling everybody they've been naive. So there's a fear of that and a clinging. You want the Bible to mean something, and so you cling to kind of a literal sense of it.
Yeah, I have a friend who went to seminary school, and he told me about how when you go there, there's this like shock that people experience because they go there because they have so much faith, and then for the first time are asked to question everything, and a lot of people can't handle it. And I guess a lot of people drop out, is what he was telling me. Yeah, and it's kind of just surprising to me. So is it has it presented that way in the church? If people go on Sunday, do they hear as if these are the answers, or do they hear more?
God, yes. Oh God, yes. I think, and it's important again not to condescend towards those people, because I think, they want the answers. And the danger in Catholicism is that it can turn towards superstition, like the rosary. If I pray the rosary 10 times, then I won't get hit by a truck or something. If I pray the rosary 10 times, or say these other prayers, or kneel, or do all this, there's a way in which it can become superstition. But absolutely, but they're looking for answers. But on the other hand, these are people who've experienced loss, experienced suffering, are dealing with real world problems. You don't have to have a PhD to have a deep faith, and having a PhD doesn't give you a deep faith. There's a maturity and a wisdom in a lot of these people that is deeper than those answers, and they know that. They just can't articulate it.
Yeah. And so is what, going back to the words, is what the words does, giving articulation to the things that they know. Is that kind of what we're doing?
Yeah, that's right. Just like any great literature, sure. Yeah. And what you want to do in a homily is you don't want to explain it. You want to try to open it up. And that's one of the things about the Mass that's so interesting. Is the best thing about the Mass is that we don't have to talk to each other. That, I can give communion to somebody who's a Republican, not that there's anything wrong with Republicans. And by the way, not all Catholics and all fundamentalists are Republicans. Not that there's anything wrong with Republicans necessarily, but I can give communion to somebody whose political views are abhorrent to me, because we share something deeper. So it's not just words in the Catholic Mass. It's the Eucharist itself. And in a way, what you do when you receive the host is you're eating the words. Is one of the ideas. So it's both. So I think people experience things in the church, the smells and bells and so on, and the kneeling and standing and all of that. And again, I think Judaism, I think it's traditional religion that's, I wonder if it's different on the East Coast when there are many more, people have many more experiences of traditional religion. Here in the West Coast and in Oregon, students are really, really unchurched. And Catholicism, Judaism, sort of mainstream Protestantism, not really as well known. So it may be that in the West, but the evangelicals, that's a wide category too, I should say. But I think there's just a natural fallback for searching for answers. I'm just repeating myself.
Well, I think we got to wrap it up. But I love talking to you, Chris. It's always fun. Let's do the last poem.
Okay. And this is a poem that, it kind of summarizes everything I've been trying to say or not say. And this is one I sent out on my newsletter. This is a poem that people really responded to, and it just really taught me something. And it's a response to what's happening in the world today and so on. There's a Christian writer, Jesuit, a Catholic writer, who says prayer is a long, loving look at the way things really are. the final thing. The word "and" is the most important word in Scripture. It's parataxis. And this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and it was good. You want to sound like the Bible, use a lot of "and." Everything happening. It's not this or that. My roses are blooming, my yellow roses, and a child is dying of hunger or disease or a gunshot or grief, and someone is laughing, and someone is crying, and someone is lifting a cup. A star is exploding, a heart is breaking. The wind is blowing over a desert, over a forest, over the sea, and it is morning, and it is evening, and it is the first day and the last. And every moment somewhere, the host is being raised in the air, in the air, in the air. So for me, the big question for all of us is, what do we do, and do our little gestures make a difference? And the host, the body of Christ, you raise it up in the air, and this is really vulnerable. What difference does it make? And this is the struggle, Tim, for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It makes every difference in the world, or we're totally deceiving ourselves. And I don't know, it's this and it's that. You're just holding it up, holding it up, holding it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, a great poem to end on, and just a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for being a guest, Chris. I knew it was going to be inspiring, and it was. So I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, yeah, that was Chris Anderson. You can find him at deaconchrisanderson.com and sign up for that newsletter, which is wonderful. His books of poetry, You Never Know, and The Next Thing Always Belongs, which I have both copies right here. And Light When It Comes, of course, is the book of homilies mixed with poems, which Clayton Clark mentioned she picked up a copy on Audible. You can buy a copy on Audible, and I think probably listen to Chris read it, or somebody anyway. So do pick up a copy of that, and hope you enjoy this Rattlecast. We're going to go to a quick break, and then we're going to go to open lines. So hang tight with me. I will post the stuff on the let me find it. The invite. I don't have it because it's a new link. Okay. So I'm going to deploy these links. If you'd like to share a poem on, but only if you'd like to share a poem. If you just want to listen, stay right where you are. If you'd like to share a poem, join us on the Zoom, which I'm putting in the chat window right here, either on Facebook or YouTube. You can find that. And join us to share a poem, and then, read your poem when it's your turn, and then come back to the regular stream so you can read along and see the poems. That's how we do it. So pop over to Zoom if you would like to share a poem. I'm going to go to a quick break, stand up and stretch, get everything prepared, and I will be right back. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. I forgot to mention, if you if you'd like to read a poem, join us on the Zoom through those links that I shared, and also email your poem to openmic. That's openmic@rattle.com, so we can show the poems on screen as you read them. Let's see. So let's go first to Emily Pease. Emily, I think, is a first time. I like to do the first time joiners first.
Yeah, I haven't poem though.
Oh, no problem, Emily. I can swing back to you if you want to do that, and then we'll come back.
I forgot to mention, if you
I think I hear myself in the background too of somebody.
Join us on the Zoom through those links.
Let me see. Let's see. So also, Emily, So also only listen through the Zoom. I know it's kind of hard to jump back and forth, but only listen through the Zoom and don't watch the stream while you're sharing poems too, because we have to. We don't want the delay with a repeat effect. Let's go inside to T.R. Powelson. Hey, T.R., how you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. So I was thinking about you last night because I was watching that Kentucky Derby, and that was an amazing race, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the best race riding I've ever seen by a jockey who's he comes from the backyard racetracks of Ohio. But I mean, the way he maneuvered through that field from near last to first, and it just gives me the whole story behind it. I mean, I'm sure I mean, your inbox is probably going to be just flooded with Kentucky Derby poems after that, just all the different stories behind it. And
well, I don't know.
I'm sure you'll see some of mine, but I hope you find others besides mine.
Well, I don't know. We don't get a lot of poems about horses, so I'd be surprised if we had any others. But it was fascinating to watch. I had to watch it twice because that guy comes out of nowhere. It's amazing.
Oh, I've watched it over and over and over and over. The whole thing. And the Kentucky Oaks the day before was really good, and just an amazing weekend of horse racing. But the poem I want to read today is not about horse racing.
Yeah. So what's this poem about? Confession of a UPS driver, and that's in New Verse News, which is, of course, a great website for everybody. I'll put it on screen. This is a great website if your poem doesn't, send it to us first, of course. But then if it doesn't make it, it's one of the poems that I can pick that week. Send it to New Verse News, because this website is just wonderful. It's New Verse News, all one word, at .blogspot.com, and they publish poems about current events. Been doing it longer than Poet Respond, actually, by a couple of years. So what is this?
And he does a great job. Like, I mean, they're easier to get into because they don't pay probably, and they publish more, like a couple per day sometimes. But it's really good poems. I'm signed up. You can sign up to, just like with Rattle, to receive them in your inbox. Mm-hmm. And so I love waking up to great current events poems. I believe Dick Westheimer's been in it. A lot of great poets.
Yeah, there definitely are. Yeah, it's a good read all the time. I'm so glad they exist. So, and I'm so glad you could have a poem there.
So mine, I actually submitted. Mine was actually a Rattle reject last week that I forwarded to New Verse News, and it's about just the monopolistic way that Amazon is taking over, and the way Amazon is trying to own the whole world. Mm-hmm. And it's starting to affect us as UPS. I'm a UPS driver. So when it starts coming home to affect you, then it's, you notice things affect you more.
Yeah, for sure.
How to say it, other than through poetry. So I'll just read it.
Okay.
I want to meet the owner of the first bookstore brought down by Amazon. I want to find a bar on a dark street with a strange name, tucked in a city I've never visited. I want to meet the bankrupt bookstore owner and make witty conversation only two passionate lovers of books would understand. I'd order wine and tell her I've punched gate codes, delivered books from Amazon to folks off Skyline Boulevard. I'd say I'm sorry. We would joke about Anne Sexton, Dr. Seuss, and obscure heroes, villains. We'd share more wine, poke fun at Hamlet, digress to Joshua, to a hooker named Rahab, who once hung a red ribbon to save herself when foreigners toppled the walls of Jericho. We'd talk about hidden twists and plots and dialogue, hobbled horses lipping grain from hands. We'd tell secrets about who F's whom and for how much money. At 2 a.m., we'd say farewell. I'd pay the tab. I'd mingle, flirt, allow a sleazy drunk to take me home, pretend that everything he did to me felt good.
Yeah, that was great. And I remember that poem from the submissions. I love the way the rhymes move through. And then you don't rhyme the last couplet, which is interesting. What was behind that?
That's just felt good, what felt good in the moment. And, you know, a lot of what they teach in poetry workshops is that you can go from not rhyming to all of a sudden rhyming at the end. But I thought it was good to work backwards with it. And the way Amazon is destroying things, I thought that, you know, I just went with that. And, you know, I know there's a lot of, I mean, Amazon has a 70% approval rating, which just amazes me how much people love that monster.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure lots of people will read my poem and be offended by it, but
yeah, well, I thought it worked great. I mean, you know, the way that end, it just feels so cut off and like broken, and it's representative of the way that the you know, subject matter. I thought it was a great move there.
yeah, thanks for having us on, and great conversation as usual today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for being here, TR. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye. Okay, let's go next to Nivedita. See how Nivedita's doing today.
Hello.
Hey, Nivi, how you doing?
Hey, Tim. I'm doing great, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing excellent. So, what do you have that you would like to share?
I tried my hand at a demi-sonnet. I say tried because I think I can make it better, but this is what I have, so I just thought I'll share it for now.
Very cool. Okay, this is day versus night. Is there anything you want to say about it, or do you want to just jump right in?
No, but you didn't introduce the prompt, so you may want to.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, good idea. So the prompt, is to write a demi-sonnet, which you have to watch last week's episode maybe, or there's a Wikipedia page, but to know what it is. Demi means half, so it's a half sonnet. It's a form invented by Erin Murphy, and she actually, I don't know if she's going to be here, she sent a new demi-sonnet that she wrote for the open lines right now too. But a demi-sonnet it's a half sonnet, 7 lines, and the only real rule is that the last word rhymes. And the rhyme can appear anywhere within the poem. So it's kind of a surprise where the rhyme comes from, which is one of the aspects of it that's interesting. And so that's a demi-sonnet, and this is yours, day versus night. Go ahead.
Day versus night. The dawn chorus, loud and rash, was certainly no Eden, and the twittering cacophony was an assault to my hearing. I wish it was forever the night, so coy and quiet, so I can think and write before the sky turns pink as my mind runs into a tunnel come morn. But night is night and day is day, and there's no two ways about this. So I guess I'll just have to learn to write at day and sleep at night.
Very good. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Debbie.
Thank you, Tim. It was lovely talking to you. Have a great Sunday.
Yep, you too. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, Nivedita Karthik with day versus night. And let me see, we'll admit some more people over here. Erin Murphy is here. Let's go to Erin Murphy then, since we just mentioned her. If we can, once she can connect. Let's see. Yeah, we'll go right to Erin. Let's go to Erin Murphy then, since we just... I think you got to mute the Rattlecast, though.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, does that work?
It does. Hey, Erin, it's good to see you again. I had no idea you'd come, and then I looked at the screen here, and I saw a poem from you, which is really cool. So you wrote, you know, I think you probably don't need an explanation of what a demi-sonnet is, since you made it up.
Well, I just got back from a Mother's Day walk with my daughter, and so I'm like terribly hot and sweaty. Tempted not to turn on the video, but I decided that would be rude, so you guys can see me in all of my sweatiness. But I thought it might be fun to share the first demi-sonnet that I ever wrote.
Oh, cool.
So
that would, yeah.
About 12 years ago. So I talked a little bit about this last week on the Rattlecast, that I was doing a DIY like writing residency. And it started with, one 7-line poem and then another and then another. And then before I knew it, I'd written like 120 of them. But this was the first one. And it didn't have the name Demi-Sonnet right away. That came a little later when I realized I was writing in these little sort of half sonnet forms. But yeah, so I thought I'd share Word Problem, which then became the whole collection that came out in 2011 is called Word Problems.
Very
It's from
cool.
WordPress. There's a lot of word involved. So Word Problem. If a vehicle is traveling 55 miles an hour on a 400-mile trip, and a 4th-grade girl with a tear-shaped mole on her left cheek factors in 2 rest stops and a lunch break on a rickety fishing pier, how many hours will it take her to realize she's an artist, not an idiot? How many years?
Oh, that's great. And so let me ask, since you didn't know you were writing this form, was that rhyme of the peer and years accidental? Because that's the essential part of the how you have that buried end rhyme.
Right. No, that was intentional. And then I found myself, writing another one and another one and another one. And all of them have that. What was different in the original series was that I had the first line as the title for all of them. And then later I went back and changed it and gave them their own independent titles. But that was really the only thing that changed as far as the form and the structure.
Well, very cool. Well, I'm so glad you could share. It's fun to see the very first one, and then we'll see.
Yeah,
what
I'm
everyone else
excited
writes.
to hear everybody else's. So thanks. See you guys.
Very cool. Yeah, great to see you, and happy Mother's Day too, by the way.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, yeah, that was Aaron Murphy, the inventor of the demi-sonnet. Let's see what other demi-sonnets we have here. Let's go to Andrew Trudinick.
We'll go right to Aaron.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Andrew, how you doing? I got a pretty dark screen. Something's in front of it, I think. There you go.
It's my little weird. It's got a little hatch thing that switches off. I sent 2, but there might not be time for 2.
I think, are they kind of shorter? Or are they?
Yeah. Well, they're demi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You could do 2 demi-sonnets, sure.
And one sort of was, completely experimental, but one of them turns out to be a bit biblical. So it's kind of like fits in with Chris's thing, just kind of as the universe is wont to do.
Yeah, it's weird how that works. That stuff always happens. Very, it's no wonder.
So can I start with my student is tuning?
Yeah, I got it right here.
Which it's inspired by a line from one of Erin's poems, My Student is Turning. And I'll read a little bit at the bottom because her poem resonated totally with a student experience I was having myself or right in the midst of. As a teacher, you learn together with students. You lead each other. Erin's poem resonated with me as I'd had a music student who was both inspired by our work together and who had dropped out. He left our high school just last week, but is now coming back next week to play his song in a final concert. We'd been learning a song together, me accompanying him as you do. So I'll read the poem. My student is tuning. And from Erin's poem, I think of my student, I think of what I think is mine, of what is his. My student is turning. I'm a student at this week's online poets conference, and open mic readers lean in from everywhere. We learn together. Erin reads to us. I'm sitting at a poetry reading beside my student, which has me thinking of my student who dropped out last week. He'd been teaching me his song so we could play together at next week's concert. I wish I could hit rewind, Erin reads. And he's coming back now to play his song, I found out today.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Andrew.
And that was literally, I found out, like on Friday or whatever. So, yeah. And the other one is a poet went out to sow. Sort of inspired by the parable of the sower, which is said to be a parable about parables. So perhaps sowing seeds is the ultimate metaphor for learning or for life.
Interesting. Yeah, go ahead. A poet went out to sow.
A poet went out to sow. Behold, a sower went out to sow. From Matthew. The poet went out to sow some seeds, having heard that a sage said that, and thinking, let's give it a go. Now, there weren't any actual seeds, because it's a parable, right? But someone said, what's with this seed? Well, you could plant it and see.
Excellent. Another great one. Thanks so much for sharing that, Andrew. Both of those.
So 2 attempts at Demi-Sonnets, and thanks to Aaron.
Very good. Yeah, thanks so much. Always happy to have you join.
Okay, cheers.
Okay, cheers. Yeah, that was Andrew Trudanic. And yeah, let's do 2 short poems or 1, if it's longer than a sonnet, just 1. But if it's shorter than a sonnet, we can do 2 today. Let's go to Mike Bales.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing today, Mike?
Good, busy. I've got a workshop due later, so I'm doing this. I'll escape to an art fair for a while, catch a breath of fresh air, then be at it again. I wanted to read my poem, So Glad You Stayed.
Okay, was that, did you submit that?
So Glad You Stayed.
Okay, let me pull it up. So explain, that was a submission, right?
Right, it's one of the Poet Respond poems I sent.
Yeah, so explain what it's about while I pull it up.
Well, it's something we've got to talk about. I think the COVID thing kind of exacerbated it. Trouble with suicidal people, and it's a heavy topic, is that they don't have people to listen to. And this is kind of treating it a light message. A teenager lost her soulmate friend, and she, in response to the grief, and I'm sure it was very hard, she started a group, So Glad You Stayed. I was out of the Des Moines Register, and it's a heavy topic, but if you let people speak, I think it's good people survive if you let them speak.
Yeah,
So
for
that's
sure.
kind of the problem. A Facebook friend says, too, that she's had her own experiences with a rough life, says, we've got to listen to troubled people. And this is called So Glad You Stayed. Did you have it up, or?
It starts 2 soulmates?
Yeah, 2 soulmates.
Okay, yeah, I think you'd change the title, but yeah.
Title.
Yeah, I have it up. Go ahead.
Okay. 2 soulmates. One dies by suicide. The other talks about it 3 weeks later on an April day. She says the friend made her safe and strong. The story lives another day of how she couldn't save him. She couldn't reach him on Snapshot. Social distance during COVID-19 grew too great. Distant conversations, she says. He had a crisis, a broken soul. Resolutely, she reaches out to others as she must. Something must be said. No one else must die. His voice echoes in the park as others play, and others gather on a sunny day to give light to their shadows, touched by sadness, but a newfound gladness shared. A collective voice sounds, a chorus, a breeze. I'm glad you're around.
Yeah, touching poem for a sad story. Thanks so much for sharing that, Mike.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Yeah, always a pleasure. All right. Let's go next to Jennifer Elise Wang.
Hey.
Hey, Jen, how you doing today?
I'm good. I originally had a demi-sonnet, but then just, with all the news, I decided that I'm going to read my Poets Respond poem, which I guess I should put content warning that it's not very motherly for Mother's Day and talks about periods. So if that's not your thing, be warned.
Well, no problem. Yeah, thanks for the warning, but let's hear it. This is birth, right?
Yes, birth.
Okay.
I read the news in between baby announcements from 2 old roommates while I was sitting on the toilet, feeling like I gave birth to a demon. It was just cramps and a clot, cells that could be flushed away. But I'm also reminded of the haunting I experienced from this body that does not feel like my own. You're too young. You will change your mind. Motherhood is sacred, the greatest accomplishment of a woman. I don't even want to be a woman. And I'm old enough to be jailed for trying to take care of an accident, or even just having an accident. I could be punished for saving a child's life by giving them what I couldn't have. help stop the metamorphosis before they become haunted by demons that grow in their bodies. In between the congratulations I compose to my old roommates, I think about aborting the girlfriend they knew, the daughter my parents had, and plan for my own birth one day.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for sharing that. A wonderful poem,
Yeah,
The Birth, Jennifer Elise Wang.
Yeah, and I just also want to say, it was also a response to, I'm in Texas, so there's just a lot of anti-trans legislation too, so there's been a lot of feelings around bodies and
for sure,
what's
there
been going
definitely
on.
are. Yeah, there definitely are. I mean, that was what most of the poems submitted were about this week. So yeah, I'm glad to get some of these on the podcast too. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's go back. I see that I have Emily Peace's poem, so let's go back to Emily Peace. Just unmute and we'll be ready.
Okay.
Hey, Emily, how you doing?
Fine. Glad to see you, Tim.
Yeah. So what was it that you'd like to share?
Well, I don't have a demi-sonnet, but now I'm challenged to write a lot of them.
Yeah, it's a fun form. It's kind of a poem that, once you get going, it kind of right to the ending. It's a nice, simple way to do it. I like it.
Yeah, this one is not a sonnet, and it needs to be. It's 12 lines, but right now I kind of like it at 12. It's called False Spring.
Okay.
False Spring. As when the mare feels a foal within and her milk flows, false hope. As when she shifts in her stall, phantom hooves kicking in an imagined trot. As when she's hitched to a plow at dawn, begins carving frozen ground. Fulless, still she imagines spring. As when I heard the word expecting. Sun so electric, I shielded my eyes. I dreamed many names. For weeks, I waited to hear your rushing heart. As when the mare sleeps to the sound of a silent barn.
Oh, that's a beautiful poem. And actually, that would work great as a demi-sonnet, I think. Just find a word that rhymes with barn to sneak in and then, make the lines a little longer so it's 7. And that's the exact, trajectory for it. I think that'd be great.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, but thanks for sharing that. Always a pleasure, Emily. It was Emily Peace with False Spring. Let's go to Dick Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick. How you doing?
Good. I think you'd love that Robert Alter's discussion of poetry in the Jewish Bible.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I mean, I made a note already to check that out because it definitely sounds right up my alley, and somehow I've never heard about it. So
yeah, I've got 4 or 5 of his books. I'll send you a link to the one that I think got me hooked on his the way he looks at things.
Very cool. Thanks. I appreciate that. So what did you want to read?
So I do have a demi-sonnet, the demi-sonnet for the dead, but I think I'll read my prayer of the blessed vessels.
Okay. I think we have time. Neither of them are terribly long. I think you could do both.
Okay. Well, the prayer of the blessed vessels, I'd really be interested in folks in the chat telling me whether I have transgressed, because it is a persona poem, basically in the persona of a very angry woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not entirely comfortable with that voice, but it's the voice that, this is the master emissary. Mm-hmm. This was the emissary not having a choice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my opinion is everybody should be able to write about anything, and then, the chips fall where they may, but that's just me.
Yeah. So this is a prayer of the blessed vessels, and it's in response to sort of the aftermath of the release of the draft opinion and some of the really sort of heinous things you started seeing, such as the Mississippi law that will ban, considers a human life as starting at conception, which would ban birth control. Yeah. And I read somewhere where someone talked about women as blessed vessels. Vessels is a popular term. And then there's something at the end about a line in the opinion about the domestic supply of infants.
Oh, yeah, that was a creepy way to phrase
my
that,
sort
for
of
sure.
rage and dismay grew. So
yeah.
This is the master telling the emissary just to shut up. So So it's Prayer of the Blessed Vessels, a screed on the tentative overturning of Roe v. Wade. Dear God of the goddamn fathers, we, the ones your men have declared blessed vessels, we petition you. Call time out on these judging sons of Adam, who say society deserves what is up our skirts, to gawk, to grab, to fill us full of what makes them men, their greedy hands, their manly members, their loads of precious fluids, their DNA, their names, their claims of all that is inside of us. They curse our desires to be anything but what they crave, a chalice they can drink all they want from, a bin for their burning coals, an urn for their spent ashes, a flask for their goddamn drunken rages, which they blame on us being sluts, us not being sluts enough, us not understanding how hard it is to be a man when all those other men strut around swinging their dicks in the faces of lesser men. If we grow love, they claim it. If we lust for them, they claim it. If we grow a zygote, they claim it with their words, praise it as something they call life. Name it precious. Say it is more godly than us, more sacred than a mother's love, more pure than a baby, a child, a girl, a woman, any other living thing. Their justices, Danforth's all, call forth in judgment that we are vessels to grow their domestic supply of infants. O God of the goddamn fathers, how can we love them as much as we want when all they want from us is everything?
Yeah, really, that's a great ending. I think it really picks up to the end. Excellent poem. Thanks for sharing that, Dick. And then let him know what you thought in the chat. He'll be watching.
I would be interested because this is a group that has hurt, I trust. So the Demi-Sonnet for the Dead, I just loved the form. I just toyed around with it all week. And this one actually I wrote right after Rattlecast. So, and it basically was responding to the further discovery of mass graves. In Ukraine. Demi-Sonnet for the Dead. I am pro plain pine box, pro urn of ash, pro mortality and dust and bodies decaying into dirt, except when bulldozed into ditches. I am not pro ditches, not pro pits dug by victims, not pro pleading or pushing into crypts. The burying of bodies should be done by hand, one sifted fistful at a time, dirt mixed with tears, sometimes blood.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great demi-sonnet. And isn't the form, I can see why Aaron sort of gets addicted to that form. It's a form that I want to write more.
Yeah, you have to. I tried writing a second part to this, a second demi-sonnet that got specific, but it's really hard to pack in anything more than just the one distillation. So that's a great form. I like it a lot.
Yeah, it is. It challenges you to be, not be wordy, which is, is nice.
Hey, like poetry.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, thanks for sharing that, Dick.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, let's go to let me make sure I admit. Okay, I always forget to go back to the admit button. Okay. Let's go to Bev Wendell Atherstone.
Hi, Tim. How are you today?
Good. How you doing, Bev?
Yeah, great. Oh, I love Dick's poem. Oh, that was just perfect. Perfect. I see he's left. Yeah, a very, very interesting session today. And like Dick, I wrote my demi-sonnet last week, right after the program. It's a very fun form. And I was so upset. I watched a program where hunters are shown in their hides, and they're watching the animals, and then they kill the animals with a crossbow. And in this particular one, it was killing a full-grown male bear.
Yeah, it's hard to watch.
It was very hard, especially after the hunter was commenting on the behaviors of the bear, and you could see a great deal of empathy about the bear. And then, anyway, here's my poem,
Okay.
Taking a Bear. An outfitter TV ad features a hunter with his guide. Fascinated, I watch their preparations in disbelief. A modern crossbow assures absolute success. To take a vibrant life for a single trophy photo brings disbelief. Relishing his last relief, a black bear scratches, stretched tall on a tree. The hunter marvels at its huge size in disbelief. Baited bear, bated breath, trophy photo. I cry in disbelief.
Oh, very interesting poem. Almost combining a demi-sonnet with a guzzle or something. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, the repetition is very cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you very much.
Yep, take care.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go next to Ethne.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, how is it that I pronounced that again?
Oh, don't worry.
Well, I want to get it right, but I just have to lodge it in my head.
It's Ethna.
Ethna, okay. Yeah.
Just imagine it's an A at the end rather than an E.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I will make a note, make a mental
Well, honestly, it's no problem. It's no problem.
So what is it that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I found out earlier today that it was Mother's Day in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And since I've come on the session today, I always now also realize that it's Mother's Day in the US. So I had earlier today I wrote a demi-sonnet about my mum. I had a lovely day out with her when I last saw her in Ireland. So it's about that.
Very great, thanks. Yeah, go ahead. I have it up on screen.
Okay, so it's called Unbowed at a National Trust Property. The daffodils are opening. There's no frost, no snow, no rain, so the weather allows a trip with Mum. Double-barreled wealth, preserved in the house by the stream, shouts, look, but don't touch. Mum speaks louder and refuses all the chairs.
Oh, it's wonderful. I love that ending. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks, Ethna. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, and let's go to Guy Chambers next.
Hello, Tim.
Hey, Guy. How you doing today?
Not too bad. Yeah, I got a demi-sonnet. I don't know if it's really a demi-sonnet. I took a shot at it this week here. It's very short. Like I got a couple of short poems, but my first one here is called Words.
Okay.
Beyond simple words, a motive to the captive, colors to the world. Negative is emptiness. Heard words can hurt. Positive can always go a long way to ease and please.
Excellent. It's cool to hear the demi-sonnet in the in your form. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that, Guy.
Yeah, because I see like positive is always a big thing in anything, So like your show is mostly positive. That's what it always creates things better. If you're negative all the time, not too many people go that way, not too. So yeah. So I got time for my last one, or this real small one?
Yeah, go ahead. It's very short. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It's called Dreamers. In the eyes of a dreamer, life isn't what it is. I say, use your imagination all the time. Don't take life as it is. Just change it, to what you want and just go with it, and that too. So,
yeah, that was great advice. Thanks for sharing. In the eyes of a dreamer, life isn't what it is. I love that. Life isn't what it is. Yeah, thanks, Guy.
So I've been busy here last few. I haven't been for a couple of shows here. I've been busy with that 30 poems for 30 days, and plus,
yeah.
And then last Saturday, I was helping launch Poets for Ukraine. It's a book put up from out of Toronto.
Oh, cool.
About 51 poets across the world got put into this book, and I actually got 2 poems in there. Then last Sunday at the Edmonton Poetry Festival, we were launching it. So it's a good book. I even got a poets from Ukraine in it too. So it's good. You can order it online. It's a really good book, and all the funds go to the Ukraine for helping the Ukrainians out and that too. So.
Yeah, that sounds great. How would people find it, or what's it called again?
I put it up in here. It's called Poets for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 volumes because he's like it's from Toronto. This David Bridges started it out, and he got so many replies, so he decided to put out a second book. And you can go to David Bridges. It's I got it in here where you can order the book. It's My Bridges at yahoo.ca.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very good prices. Each book is about $10 a book, and it's $5 just to ship and all that stuff. But all the proceeds go to the ref for the Ukraine things. It's a really good book. It's really quality and everything else. They say that David Bridges, he's out of Toronto, and he had his publishing company do it for free.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and he actually, even after he got all this all set up, he had more and more people trying to get more poets about the war, because he just wrote about people written about the war or protests against the war. So I had a couple poems in there. It was great to be on the launch thing to launch it out last Sunday.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks for sharing that, Guy. Always a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, take care. It was Guy Chambers, and let me see. I think there's Kimberly in the waiting room, we have to admit. If anybody wants to join, there's still a little bit of room. I also have some poems to read. That people sent in some demi-sonnets. The people who couldn't make the open mic but sent in a demi-sonnet, so I'll read some of those. But hey, Kimberly, you're there. Let's see if she can connect. Let's see, it's trying to connect. I'm going to leave it down. Let's go to, we'll see if it can connect, but I'll go and read a couple of these poems first. Carla Schwartz included a poem and audio of her reading the demi-sonnet. So let me get that loaded up. Here we go. Yeah, so I think let's see. This is Carla Schwartz reading Final Goodbye. And this is the poem. This is Carla's demi-sonnet. So yeah, here we go.
Final Goodbye, a demi-sonnet by Carla Schwartz at CB99 Videos. I knew saying goodbye was for me, but thought saying goodbye was for him, though each labored breath, each thin whistle, threw reason out the door. Who was I to hold on when death had already won?
Excellent. I love that. That was a Final Goodbye by Carla Schwartz. That one, hold on, great near rhyme there. I really like that. Thanks for sharing that, Carla. This is Ted Guevara's demi-sonnet, and he, of course, a lot of times he includes pictures. This is actually a pair of demi-sonnets, heavy and light, and he has a picture. There's a quote from Anne Frank in this picture. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. That's Anne Frank, a quote that he includes. And then for some reason, there's a backpack with a wheelchair racing type graphic on it for those that are just listening. And this is his heavy and light sonnets. Demi-sonnets, heavy and light, this is called. Get your groove back on, Dutch-German diarist. The web in your toes evolved no swim grace. The tongue of the world laps still at the creases of the four walls you've been in. Their aim is to harden the plaster more, so store more items in your survival kit. Fins will outshine the use of candles. And then the second part, I keep forgetting I'm wearing a backpack. In the morning, there is content in what I put in. But as the day progresses with its feather winds and small whimsical disputes, the pack disowns me, says it's no part of me. Rough thread count shifting on my skin gives in to imagination, involuntarily. So there's a pair of demi-sonnets by Ted Guevara. Thanks, Ted, for sharing those. Let me go back and see if we can admit. Let's see, we'll try Kimberly again. See if we can get Kimberly on. Hey, Kimberly, are you there? Let's see. I think it's connected this time. Kimberly?
Yeah.
Hey,
Hello.
Kimberly. Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good now that I found the mute button.
Great. So you have this is Birth that you'd like to share.
Yeah.
Ah, there you are. Good to see you. let me, in 1 second, this is a poem called Birth. Let me just put it in Word document really quick. It's a little, okay.
I wanted to say something to kind of set the setting or whatever.
Yeah.
I wrote this during my internship year, which is usually a, kind of a busy year as a young doctor. And this is about the first delivery that I helped with.
Oh, very, very cool. Let's hear it. This is Birth. Go ahead, and let me get this up now. There it is. Go ahead.
Okay. Newborns escape the womb as monstrous human forces triangulate and funnel the smoothly muscled uterus with the squeezing force of a wrestling half Nelson. Screaming, crying, slippery, shiny, like a greased watermelon, warm and wiggling between my hands. I almost dropped a few, ruled no fumble on review. A momentary panic called birth.
Oh, excellent poem. Great recollection of that. Thanks for sharing that, Kimberly.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, always a pleasure. That was Kimberly McNeil with Birth. And I think nobody else is here. I'll leave just in case anybody wants to pop in, I'll leave, there is somebody else here. Let me see. Oh, that's still Kimberly. Okay, I see. So I'll leave it open in case. If anybody wants to jump in and share a poem, you still can. Clayton Clark has one here. There are 3 people who wanted me to read these demi-sonnets. And here's Clayton Clark's demi-sonnet. And then Megan and I both have a demi-sonnet as well. And so we'll do that after we get to the other ones too. This is Proof of Heaven, provided by my mom. And this is Clayton Clark's demi-sonnet. Proof of Heaven, provided by my mom. In this room of dreams, she lies flanked by family. A child says, "Uh-oh, Grandma is shedding her skin." Soon it is vellum. The slow march speeds, her pupils burst. Ink blots bloom across blue irises. In death, she leaves us a Rorschach test. Sly writer she'd always wanted to be. Hey, great demi-sonnet. Thanks for sharing that, Clayton. And let's see. We also have one by Dana Broadhead, if this will work. Let's see. This is sent as a screenshot, so hopefully I can get this to work right. This is a screenshot from our Anything Goes poetry group, so you can see more. This is Dana Broadhead, a poem that was posted at Rattle's Anything Goes poetry group, but he'd like me to share this, so why not? Let's go to this. You still think I stole your thunder. Hell, we were both rolling at the same time. I thought our lightning would crash together, that we could both light up the sky in our own right. This only made another storm in you, brewing even stronger than all the ones I had witnessed before. You were like a hurricane, a tornado spinning out of control, like a tidal wave after hitting the shoreline, pulling our friendship out to sea. And the current divided us. I chose to follow the moon, peaceful, shining brightly, and you chose the ocean, salty, raging in the magnetic pull, dwelling in the darkness, turning your back on the light. And now that I know better, it was always scary, the calm before your storm. I just never realized it, for I was always gathering the buckets to collect your rain, holding the flashlight for you so you could see your way back. I still wish you well, like we used to do upon the stars, and I pray for you to the one who made them, and I can still hear you rumbling, even now at a distance, and I remain at peace, thankful for it. Very nice poem. Thanks so much for sharing. That was Dana Broadhead with that poem. Your Rainbow is what it's called. It's in the subject line of the email. Let's see. Do we have anybody else who wanted to share? Okay, so let's go to, just to wrap this show up, let's go to Megan and my prompt poems. And Megan's back on the wagon. Is that how you say it? She's back writing poems again, which is always nice. And this is Megan's first poem. So these are our demi-sonnets. Here's Little League, and this is what we're doing. We're kind of like a Little League family right now, like 3 times a week and more just privately, me and my son practicing. We're just always playing baseball all of a sudden. He just loves it now. And this is Megan's Little League poem. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let me go here. Okay, this is Little League. Let me get this two fixed. That's better. Okay, so this is Little League. At 7, sometimes boys still call for their mothers when they get hurt. Some listen to their fathers who tell them to get up, rub some dirt on it. Some boys are lean with dreams. Some wander and pick buttercups. When bat hits ball, they all look up. That is Megan's Demi-Sonnet Little League. Excellent poem as always, and a happy Mother's Day to Megan as well. She's one of the best mothers in the world. There's no doubt about that. I have great kids as evidence. So thanks for being you and writing great poems all the time too, and doing prompts for us as well. Just wonderful having Megan around all the time. And this is my sonnet. And this is my demi-sonnet. The hard problem of consciousness. Who hasn't woken to the sound of the wind and wondered why? The first light of morning is never caught by the net of leaves in the neighbor's juniper. Sometimes it's spilled wine spread through a cocktail napkin. Sometimes it's water. Always it leaks. The heartbeat of the sun is 11 years. Doesn't it tire of turning? I'd still rather be than be dust, but I'm learning. That is the hard problem of consciousness. And the Sciku for this week is kind of what I wrote it right after the Sciku, so you can see, you'll see what kind of mindset I was in just from writing this poem. But this is the Sciku article. This is the news out of the Northwestern University of Medicine, or the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University, I should say. This is the article that caught my eye in Science News this week. A new tool to create hearing cells lost in aging. And so these researchers were able to find the gene that governs whether a cell will become an inner or an outer ear sense cell, like little cilia hair-like things that are inside our inner ear. Mostly when people go deaf, what happens is the outer cell die off, and there's no way to replace them. You're born with however many you have at birth. And it's always been hard. They could grow cells, but they couldn't differentiate the cells between the inner and the outer little sense receptors. And so what these people do is they found the gene that governs that, so they can turn it on or off and make the kind of cell they need. And so it could be a way to reverse hearing damage and repair that for the first time, eventually once the technology is developed. So it's a wonderful discovery. And this is the Sciku. It made me think about my grandfather. And this is the Sciku for the week. Grandpa's silence, the sound of the wind giving up. Grandpa's silence, the sound of the wind giving up. That is the Sciku for this week, and that is the show for the week. Now, next week's prompt is going to be right here. On the elevator, a stranger says something unexpected. That's next week's prompt. On the elevator, a stranger says something unexpected. You can make it a demi-sonnet if you want. You can make any kind of poem you'd like, but that is the prompt. And we'll be here with next week's guest, who is going to be Mike White. And Mike White's another one of my favorite poets. He writes these small, condensed little tight poems that I just love. How to Make a Bird with Both Hands is one of his 2 books. I'm not even sure which one's the most recent. I just put up the one that I recognize the most. I love that cover too. But he's been a Rattle Poetry Prize finalist. We published him a whole bunch of times. Always these really small, tight, amazing little poems that I don't know how he does it. I try to write poems like him, and it's impossible to condense so much into one poem like that. But that is Mike White, How to Make a Bird with Both Hands, Rattlecast number 144. Sunday, May 15th, the regular time, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you had a good show today. I know I had a wonderful time. And I will talk to you later. Goodbye.